The response to their call came faster than Jake had dared hope. Within hours, dragons began arriving from every corner of the galaxy. They came alone and in small groups, emerging from hyperspace with songs that made the void itself ring like a bell. Jake watched through the station's viewports as creatures of legend took their places around Nexus Prime. There was Thunderwing, an ancient red dragon whose scales crackled with barely contained lightning. Starweaver, whose blue hide seemed to contain entire nebulae. The twin sisters Void and Light, one black as space between galaxies, the other white as a newborn star. Dozens of others, each unique, each carrying centuries of hidden pain and suppressed power. But the hegemony was not idle. Their fleet had grown to over 100 ships, forming a perfect sphere around the gathering dragons. As Jake watched, space began to distort around the alien vessels. Reality itself was being prepared for editing. The fundamental laws of physics softened and made malleable. Fascinating. The mechanical voice of the hegemony spoke into every mind. We had not expected the reptiles to gather in such numbers. No matter. Your combined destruction will provide enough life force to complete our reality restructuring project ahead of schedule. Jake stood in the station's command center alongside Commander Jackson and Admiral Kate Sullivan, who had arrived with a small human defense force fleet. The military officers looked grim as they studied the tactical displays. Our weapons are useless, Admiral Sullivan reported. They can just decide our missiles don't exist. Projectile weapons, energy beams, even nuclear warheads, they can all be negated with a thought. What about the dragons? Commander Jackson asked. Can they fight these things? Jake felt Celestine's presence in his mind, along with the growing chorus of dragon voices. They're not built for war, he explained. Dragons are gardeners of reality, not warriors. Their power is meant to strengthen and preserve, not destroy. Then how do we win? Admiral Sullivan demanded. Jake closed his eyes and listened to the cosmic symphony building around them. Each dragon voice added its own melody to the harmony, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. But there were gaps in the music, places where voices that should have been present were silent forever. We don't fight them, Jake said slowly. We outsing them. Through the station's hull, Jake could feel the hegemony beginning their reality assault. Space near the Human Defense Force ship suddenly developed different laws of physics. Fusion reactors became unstable as the nuclear force weakened. Hull plating turned brittle as molecular bonds were redefined. One by one, the human vessels went dark. But the dragons sang louder, their combined voices pushing back against the chaos. Where their harmony was strongest, reality snapped back to its proper configuration. The failing human ships suddenly blazed with renewed power as their engines remembered how to work. Impossible, the hegemony voice snarled. The song grows stronger. How do the reptiles overcome the decay of their species? Jake felt Celestine's amusement in his mind. They have forgotten about you, Jake Morrison. The hegemony does not understand human consciousness. To them, we dragons are the only voices that matter. Jake realized what she meant. The hegemony had spent eons learning to counter dragon songs, but they had never encountered anything like human creativity. When Jake added his voice to the harmony, it didn't just amplify the music, it added chaos and improvisation that their reality editing algorithms couldn't predict or counter. All human vessels, Jake called over the comm. I need volunteers, anyone willing to risk their lives to save the galaxy. The response was immediate. Hundreds of voices from across the Human Defense Force fleet confirmed their willingness to join the fight. Jake felt a surge of pride in his species. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't calculate the probability of success. They just did what needed to be done. Link your communications to mine, Jake instructed. Listen to the dragon song and add your own voice. Don't try to match their melody, just sing whatever feels right. What happened next was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Hundreds of human voices joined the cosmic symphony, each one adding its own chaotic element to the harmony. Fighter pilots hummed while dodging reality distortions. Engineers sang work songs while repairing damage that shouldn't have been possible to fix. Even Admiral Sullivan found herself adding a military cadence to the growing music. The effect on the hegemony was immediate and devastating. Their reality editing algorithms, designed to counter the ordered harmonies of dragon song, couldn't cope with the creative chaos of human music. Weapons that should have unmade matter instead created beautiful light shows. Reality distortions that should have crushed ships instead transformed them into new configurations that somehow worked even better than before. Jake felt the moment when Celestine's children joined their full power to the song. Storm's voice carried the fury of hurricanes. Shadow sang melodies that existed in the spaces between notes. Pure Song added harmonies that seemed to come from the future and past simultaneously. The youngest dragon's contribution was the key. His ability to hear the silent music between creation's notes allowed him to predict what the hegemony would try next, and counter it before it happened. When they attempted to unmake the station's hull, Pure Song was already singing its atoms into a stronger configuration. When they tried to stop time around the human fleet, he had already accelerated it beyond their control. The hegemony ships began to malfunction as their reality editing equipment overloaded. Decades of precise programming collapsed under the weight of too much chaos, too much creativity, too much life. One by one, the alien vessels found themselves subject to the same physics as everyone else. "This is impossible," the hegemony voice screamed, its mechanical tone cracking with what might have been fear. The song was weakening. The dragons were dying. The harmony was supposed to fade. "You forgot something," Jake said, his voice carrying across the void through the power of the dragon song. "Humans don't just join existing music. We write new songs." The final battle lasted only minutes once the hegemony lost their reality-warping advantage. Dragonfire and human weapons worked together to disable the alien fleet. Most of the hegemony ships surrendered when they realized their technological superiority was gone. Others fled into hyperspace, carrying word of humanity's dangerous gift to the far reaches of the galaxy. In the aftermath, Jake stood in the cargo bay watching Celestine's children play with constructs made of solid light and crystallized music. The three hatchlings had grown again during the battle, now large enough to carry human riders. They seemed delighted by the discovery that humans could participate in dragon song, constantly trying to teach willing volunteers new harmonies. "What happens now?" Jake asked Celestine. "Now the real work begins," she replied. "For too long the cosmic harmony has been weakening as my people died or went into hiding. But new voices have joined the song, not just my children, but your entire species. Together we can heal the damage that has been done to reality itself." Jake felt the truth of her words. Even now he could sense the cosmic symphony growing stronger as more humans learned to participate. The universe itself seemed more solid, more real, as if the very laws of physics were sighing in relief. Dr. Clark approached with her ever-present scanner, her face bright with scientific excitement. "Jake, the gravitational anomalies have stabilized." "More than that, space-time itself seems to be healing old wounds. There are regions where the fabric of reality was torn by ancient weapons, but they're mending now. The dragons are gardeners," Jake explained, "and humans are, I guess we're the fertilizer, the chaos that helps new things grow." Celestine's laughter filled his mind like music, a crude but accurate metaphor. "Your species brings something to the symphony that has been missing for eons, the ability to improvise, to create something beautiful from disorder." Jake looked out through the viewport at the gathering of dragons and human ships, already planning their next move. There would be more hegemony fleets to face, more reality wounds to heal, more songs to learn and teach. But for the first time in centuries, the cosmic harmony was growing stronger instead of weaker. Dragons soared between the stars again, their songs no longer hidden. Human voices added chaos and creativity to the universal symphony, and somewhere in the deep reaches of space, reality itself hummed a little tune of contentment. Jake went back to his workbench, where a pile of broken hyperdrive coils waited for his attention. But now, as he worked, he hummed along with the quantum fluctuations of his tools. The repairs went faster, the parts fit together more smoothly, and the engines sang with perfect efficiency when he was done. After all, when you could hear the music that held the universe together, fixing a simple starship engine was easy. The stars themselves seemed to agree, pulsing gently in rhythm with the growing symphony of creation. Commander Jake Morrison was checking star charts when the voice hit his mind like a lightning bolt. He nearly fell out of his chair on the bridge of the Northern Star. The pain and loneliness in that mental cry made his chest tight and his eyes water. Jake had been in space for 15 years. He had seen strange things on 100 different worlds, but nothing had ever touched his mind like this. The voice was young and scared and completely alone. It felt like a child crying in the dark. "Commander, are you all right?" asked Amy Carter from her station. The ship's medic had sharp eyes and noticed everything. She was already reaching for her medical scanner. "I'm fine," Jake said, though he was not sure that was true. He could still feel echoes of that desperate call in his head. "Amy, have you ever heard of creatures that can talk directly to your mind?" Pete Williams looked up from his engineering console. "You mean telepaths?" "Sure, there are a few species that can do that. Why do you ask?" Jake stared at the star map showing their current position. They were supposed to be heading home after 3 months of mapping empty space. Captain Lisa Rodriguez would not be happy if they changed course now. But that voice in his head had been real, and whoever made that call needed help badly. "I just received some kind of mental distress signal," Jake said. "It came from the Valdris system," Amy frowned. "That's in the war zone. Coalition Command sent out warnings about hegemony activity in that sector. All the more reason to stay away," Pete added. "Our ship is built for exploration, not combat." Jake knew they were right. The Northern Star was a small science vessel with light shields and no real weapons. Going into a war zone would be dangerous and stupid. But he could not stop thinking about that voice. It had sounded so young and afraid. "What kind of distress signal?" Amy asked. "Could you understand it?" "Not words exactly," Jake said. "More like feelings. Pain, hunger, loneliness, and something else." He paused, trying to find the right words. "Intelligence. Whatever sent that call is smart and scared and completely alone." Pete checked his sensors. "I'm not reading any ships in distress. If someone was in trouble, wouldn't they use normal communication channels?" "Not if they couldn't," Jake said. "What if it's not a ship? What if it's something on the planet itself?" Amy pulled up information about the Valdris system on her screen. "The planet has native life forms, some kind of humanoid species called Valdorians. There are also reports of large flying creatures, but most of that data is old." Jake made his decision. "Pete, set course for Valdris. Maximum speed." "Commander, I don't think that's a good idea," Pete said. "Captain Rodriguez ordered us to return to base immediately." "The captain isn't here," Jake said. "I am, and someone out there needs help." Amy and Pete looked at each other. They had served with Jake for 2 years and trusted his judgment. He had never led them wrong before. Still, disobeying direct orders was serious business. "If we're doing this, we need to be smart about it," Amy said. "Full sensor sweeps ready to run if we see trouble." Pete sighed and started entering the new course. "This better not get us court-martialed." The Northern Star changed direction and accelerated toward the Valdris system. It would take them 18 hours to get there. Jake spent most of that time trying to understand what had happened to him. He had never experienced anything like telepathic communication before. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. As they got closer to Valdris, their sensors started picking up signs of conflict. There were metal debris fields where ships had been destroyed. The planet's orbital stations were dark and lifeless. Whatever war was happening here, it was not going well for the locals. "I'm reading energy signatures," Pete reported. "Looks like hegemony cruisers on the far side of the planet." "How many?" Jake asked. "At least 6 big ships. Maybe more hiding behind the moons." Amy checked her medical scanners. "I'm not detecting any life signs from the orbital platforms. If there were people up there, they're gone now." Jake felt sick. The hegemony was known for being ruthless. They conquered worlds by killing or enslaving everyone who lived there. If they had taken control of this system, then whatever creature had called for help was in even more danger. "Take us down to the planet's surface," Jake ordered. "Stay low and avoid the enemy ships." "Where exactly are we going?" Pete asked. "This planet has 3 continents and 2 major island chains." Jake closed his eyes and tried to feel for that mental voice again. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faint as a whisper, he sensed something calling from the northern mountains of the largest continent. "There," he said, pointing at the display. "The mountain range on the northern continent." As they entered the planet's atmosphere, alarms started going off. 3 hegemony patrol ships had spotted them and were moving to intercept. These ships were smaller than the big cruisers, but much faster and better armed than the Northern Star. "They're demanding we surrender," Amy reported. "Not going to happen," Jake said. "Pete, can you get us to those mountains?" "I can try, but they're faster than us." The chase was on. Pete pushed the Northern Star's engines as hard as they would go while Jake plotted evasive maneuvers. The hegemony ships fired energy bolts that lit up the sky around them. Most missed, but a few hit their rear shields. "Shields down to 60%, Pete called out. 40%, Amy added a few seconds later. Jake realized they were not going to make it. The enemy ships were too fast and their weapons too strong. But then he had an idea. The mountains ahead were full of deep valleys and narrow passages. If they could get into that terrain, the bigger ships might not be able to follow. "Hold on," Jake said. "This is going to be rough." He dove the Northern Star into a canyon barely wide enough for their ship. The walls flashed by so close they could see individual rocks. Behind them, 2 of the patrol ships tried to follow. One made it through. The other clipped a rock wall and exploded in a ball of fire. The remaining enemy ship was right behind them when they burst out of the canyon. But now they were deep in the mountains, and Jake could feel that mental voice getting stronger. They were close to whoever had called for help. Then disaster struck. The enemy ship got a lucky shot that hit their main engine. The Northern Star shuddered and started falling toward the mountain peaks below. "We're going down," Pete shouted over the noise of alarms and failing systems. Jake tried to control their descent, but the ship was badly damaged. "Everyone to the escape pods, now!" They had maybe 30 seconds before impact. Amy and Pete ran for their pods while Jake tried to steer the ship away from the mountain peaks. He wanted to give them the best chance of landing safely. At the last second, Jake ejected from the bridge. His pod shot away from the Northern Star, just as the ship hit the mountainside and exploded. The blast wave caught his pod and sent it spinning toward the rocks below. The last thing Jake saw before he lost consciousness was snow-covered peaks rushing up to meet him. His pod hit the ground hard and everything went black. When he woke up, he was lying in deep snow with a broken leg and a bleeding head. His emergency supplies were scattered around the crash site. The sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast, but he was alive and somewhere in these mountains someone was waiting for help. Jake's leg hurt badly, but he forced himself to move. The snow was getting deeper and the wind was getting stronger. If he stayed where he was, he would freeze to death before morning. He gathered what supplies he could carry and started walking toward the mental voice that still called to him. The voice was weaker now, like someone falling asleep. Jake was afraid that whoever needed help might not last much longer. He used a broken piece of metal from his pod as a walking stick and pushed through the snow one painful step at a time. It took him 2 hours to travel 3 miles. By the time he found the cave entrance, his hands were numb and his broken leg was screaming with pain. The opening was hidden behind fallen rocks, but he could feel the mental presence coming from inside. Jake squeezed through the gap between the rocks and found himself in a tunnel that led deeper into the mountain. Strange crystals in the walls gave off a soft blue light that helped him see where he was going. The air inside was warmer than outside, which probably saved his life. He followed the tunnel until it opened into a large cave. The sight that greeted him made him stop and stare in wonder. The walls were covered with beautiful crystal formations that sparkled like stars. Water dripped from the ceiling into carved stone bowls. It was clearly someone's home, but that someone was not human. In the center of the cave, curled up in a nest made of soft materials, was the smallest dragon Jake had ever seen. She was no bigger than a house cat, with scales that shimmered blue and green in the crystal light. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes were closed. Jake approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. As he got closer, he could see that she was terribly thin. Her ribs showed through her scales, and her wings looked too fragile to carry her weight. This was the source of the mental voice that had called across the stars for help. The little dragon's eyes opened as Jake knelt beside her nest. Instead of fear, he saw hope and relief in those golden eyes. Then her voice spoke directly into his mind, clear as spoken words. "You came," she said. "I called and you came." Jake had never experienced telepathic communication before, but it felt as natural as breathing. "My name is Jake. What's yours?" "Ember," she replied. "I have been alone for so long." "Are you here to help me?" "Yes," Jake said without hesitation. "I'm here to help." Jake examined Ember carefully. She was dehydrated and starving, but alive. He opened his emergency medical kit and found nutrition bars and water purification tablets. The food was meant for humans, but it might work for a dragon too. "When did you last eat?" Jake asked. 4 days ago, Ember replied. "I caught a small fish, but there are no more left in the pools." Jake broke off a piece of nutrition bar and offered it to her. Ember sniffed it carefully, then took a small bite. Her eyes lit up at the taste. "It's good," she said, eating the rest quickly. Jake gave her more food and clean water. As Ember ate, she told him her story through their mental link. She shared memories of her family, The attack that killed them and the long months of waiting alone in the cave. Jake felt her pain and loneliness as if they were his own. In return, Jake told Ember about himself. He showed her mental pictures of Earth, of the stars he had explored, and of his ship that had crashed trying to reach her. Ember was fascinated by the idea of traveling between worlds. "Your people can fly through space without wings?" she asked. "We build ships to carry us," Jake explained, "like metal caves that can move through the darkness between stars." As they talked, Jake learned more about Ember's abilities. She could communicate with any intelligent creature, sense emotions from great distances, and even see mental images from the past. These gifts had made her species valuable allies, which was why the hegemony had hunted them. "They fear what they cannot control," Ember said. "Dragons can speak truth to any mind. Lies become harder to believe when someone can show you what is real." Jake understood why the hegemony would want to eliminate such creatures. Their empire was built on controlling information and forcing people to believe what they wanted them to believe. Dragons like Ember could ruin that control just by existing. Over the next few days, Jake worked to help Ember recover her strength. He hunted small animals in the mountains and found edible plants growing near underground streams. Ember taught him which local foods were safe and which were dangerous. Together, they made the cave more comfortable and secure. As Ember grew stronger, her telepathic abilities expanded. She reached out across the planet and found other minds hiding in deep places. The Valdorians had built underground cities to escape the war. Some of them still fought against the hegemony forces, but they were losing badly. "My people are scattered too," Jake told her. "2 of my crew members crashed when our ship went down. I need to find them." Ember closed her eyes and stretched her mind across the mountains. After a few minutes, she opened them again with good news. "They are alive," she said. "The female with healing knowledge has found the underground people. She helps them treat their wounded. The male who understands machines works to build new communication devices." Jake felt relief flood through him. Amy and Pete were safe in helping the local resistance. But he also felt guilty for feeling happy when so many others were suffering. "Don't feel bad for being glad your friends live," Ember said, sensing his emotions. "Joy does not make sorrow less real. It just makes it easier to bear." Jake was amazed by her wisdom. Despite her youth and suffering, Ember understood things about life that many adults never learned. She had been alone for months, but she had not let loneliness make her bitter or angry. "How do you stay so hopeful?" Jake asked. "Because someone answered when I called," Ember said simply. "If one person can cross the stars to help someone they have never met, then there must be others who care too. Hope is not about knowing things will get better. It is about believing they can get better." Jake realized that Ember was right. The galaxy might be full of war and suffering, but it was also full of people like Amy and Pete who risked their lives to help strangers. It was full of Valdorians who shared their medicine with refugees. It was full of humans who would disobey orders to answer a cry for help. "What do we do now?" Jake asked. Ember stood up and stretched her wings. She was still small, but she looked stronger than when Jake had first found her. Her scales had regained some of their shine and her eyes burned with determination. "Now we fight back," she said. "The hegemony thinks they have won because they killed my family and scattered the resistance. But they made a mistake. They left me alive and they let you find me. Together we can do things neither of us could do alone." Jake looked at the little dragon who had called across the stars for help and was now ready to take on an entire empire. He thought about his crew members who were already working with the local resistance. He thought about all the people hiding in underground cities waiting for someone to give them hope. "All right," Jake said. "Let's give them a fight they won't expect." Ember's mind touched his, sharing images of what they could accomplish together. For the first time since the war began, Jake felt like they might actually have a chance to win. 3 weeks after Jake found Ember, everything changed. The little dragon had grown rapidly with proper food and care. She was now the size of a large dog, her wings strong enough to carry her short distances. More importantly, her telepathic abilities had expanded beyond anything Jake had imagined possible. Ember could now reach minds across entire continents. She had made contact with resistance cells on 3 different continents, Valdorian cities deep underground, and even some captured hegemony soldiers who still remembered who they used to be before mind control devices were implanted in their heads. "The network grows stronger each day," Ember told Jake as they sat in their cave planning their next move. "But the enemy has noticed. They know something is helping the resistance communicate." Jake studied the rough map they had drawn on the cave wall. Red marks showed hegemony positions. Blue marks showed resistance strongholds. Green marks showed the locations of the special crystals that helped amplify Ember's telepathic abilities. "What are they doing about it?" Jake asked. "They are bringing in specialists," Ember replied. "Hunters who are trained to find and capture telepathic beings. They want to take me alive so they can study how my mind works." The thought of Ember being captured made Jake's blood run cold. He had seen reports of what the hegemony did to prisoners, especially ones with unusual abilities. They would torture her until they learned how to copy her gifts, then use that knowledge to control even more people. "Then we need to move faster," Jake said. "How long before your network is strong enough to coordinate a major attack?" Ember closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. Jake watched her face as she made contact with dozens of different groups across the planet. Her expression grew more confident as she felt the strength of the connections. "Soon," she said, "the underground cities are ready to fight. My friend Amy has trained many healers who can help wounded fighters. Your friend Pete has built communication devices that work even when the enemy tries to jam them. But we need something more." "What kind of something more?" "We need the coalition forces to know we are here," Ember explained. "There are human ships in other systems that could help us, but they think this planet is already lost. They will not risk their people for a hopeless cause." Jake understood the problem. The coalition military was fighting the hegemony on 100 different worlds. They had to choose their battles carefully and focus their resources where they could do the most good. A single planet with primitive resistance fighters would not seem worth saving. "Can you reach mines in other star systems?" Jake asked. "I can try," Ember said, "but it would take enormous energy. I would need the planet's biggest crystal formations to amplify my thoughts that far." Jake looked at their map again. The largest crystal deposits were marked in purple, scattered across different continents. Most were in areas controlled by the hegemony. "That means going into enemy territory," Jake said. "Yes, and it means revealing myself to them. Once I use that much telepathic energy, every sensor on the planet will know exactly where I am." Jake realized what Ember was suggesting. She wanted to risk everything on one desperate gamble. If it worked, they might get the help they needed to drive the hegemony off their world. If it failed, she would be captured or killed, and the resistance would lose its most valuable asset. "There has to be another way," Jake said. "There is no other way," Ember replied gently. "I have been thinking about this for days. The enemy grows stronger while we hide. Soon they will have enough forces to crush all resistance on this planet. This is our only chance," Jake wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He had seen the intelligence reports Pete had intercepted from hegemony communications. More ships arrived every day. More weapons were being deployed. More mind control devices were being installed in captured prisoners. "Where's the best crystal formation?" Jake asked. "Mount Taylor on the southern continent. It has the largest cluster of amplification crystals on the planet, but it is also where the hegemony has built their main base." Jake felt his heart sink. Mount Taylor was the most heavily defended location on the planet. Getting there would be nearly impossible. Getting out alive would be a miracle. "How do we get past their defenses?" Jake asked. "We don't go around them," Ember said. "We go through them, but not alone." Over the next few days, Jake and Ember worked with the Resistance to plan the most ambitious operation in the planet's history. Every fighting group would attack hegemony positions at the same time. This would divide the enemy's attention and draw defenders away from Mount Taylor. Amy had trained Valdorian healers who could use the planet's natural medicines to counteract hegemony mind control drugs. These healers would accompany each attack group to help free captured prisoners. Pete had built portable communication devices that could not be jammed. These would allow all the groups to coordinate their attacks perfectly. But the most important part of the plan involved Ember herself. She would lead a small team to Mount Talar while the other attacks were happening. Once there, she would use the crystal amplifiers to send a telepathic message powerful enough to reach human ships in nearby star systems. "What will you tell them?" Jake asked. "The truth," Ember said. "That this planet is still fighting. That the people here refuse to give up. That they deserve help from anyone who believes in freedom." Jake knew it was a good message, but he also knew it might not be enough. Coalition commanders made decisions based on military strategy, not emotional appeals. They would want to know what strategic value this planet had. "Tell them about the crystals," Jake suggested. "These amplification crystals are rare. If the hegemony gets full control of them, they could use them to make their mind control technology much more powerful. Ember's eyes lit up. You are right. This is not just about saving one planet. It is about preventing the enemy from getting a weapon they could use against many planets. The plan was set. In 3 days, every resistance group on the planet would attack at the same time. Jake would lead the team going to Mount Taylor, with Ember hidden in a specially designed pack that would protect her from enemy sensors until she was ready to use her abilities. The night before the attack, Jake and Ember sat together watching the stars through the cave entrance. Both of them knew they might not survive the next day, but neither was afraid. They had found something worth fighting for. Whatever happens tomorrow, Jake said, I want you to know that answering your call was the best decision I ever made. And I want you to know that having you as my guardian has been the greatest gift of my life. Ember replied. They did not need to say more. The bond between them had grown beyond friendship into something deeper. They were family now, connected not by blood but by choice and shared purpose. Tomorrow they would either free their world or die trying. But tonight they were together, and that was enough. As the stars wheeled overhead, resistance fighters across the planet made their final preparations. Weapons were checked. Plans were reviewed. Messages were sent to loved ones who might never see them again. The hegemony had conquered hundreds of worlds by convincing people that resistance was hopeless. Tomorrow they would learn that hope was stronger than fear, and that sometimes the smallest voice could change everything. The attack began at dawn. Across 3 continents, resistance fighters struck hegemony positions with coordinated precision. Valdorian warriors emerged from their underground cities. Human rebels used Pete's communication devices to synchronize their movements. Amy's trained healers rushed to free prisoners from mind control facilities. Jake and his small team moved toward Mount Taylor, while explosions lit up the sky around them. The plan was working. Enemy forces were being pulled away from the mountain to deal with attacks everywhere else. But Jake knew they still faced the hardest part of their mission. Mount Taylor rose from the southern desert like a giant crystal spear. The hegemony had built their base around the mountain's peak, where the largest amplification crystals grew. Energy shields protected the base from air attack. Weapon platforms covered every approach route. How do we get through all that? Asked Carlos, one of the Valdorian fighters on Jake's team. We don't fight our way through, Jake said. We sneak through. Ember, hidden in the special pack on Jake's back, reached out with her mind to scan the enemy base. There is a maintenance tunnel that leads into the mountain, she reported through their mental link. The entrance is on the north side, hidden behind a sensor array. Can you disable the sensors? Jake asked. Not without alerting them to my presence, but I can confuse them. Make the sensors show empty space instead of our real positions. It was risky. Using her telepathic abilities this close to the enemy, base would make Ember detectable to their scanning equipment, but it was their only chance to get inside unnoticed. Jake's team crept around the base of the mountain, staying low and moving slowly. When they reached the sensor array, Ember carefully extended her mind and began altering what the devices reported. The sensors showed clear ground while Jake and his team crawled past them into the maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by emergency strips along the walls. Jake led the way with Ember still hidden in her pack. Behind him came Carlos and 3 other Valdorian fighters, all armed with weapons Pete had modified to work against hegemony armor. They climbed through the tunnel for an hour before reaching a maintenance hatch that opened into the base's lower levels. Jake carefully lifted the hatch and peered out into a corridor lined with pipes and cables. The area was empty, but they could hear enemy soldiers moving on levels above them. The crystal chamber is at the top of the mountain, Ember whispered into Jake's mind. We need to go up 20 levels. Can you sense how many enemies are between us and there? Jake asked. Ember extended her telepathic senses carefully. 40 soldiers on the route we need to take, but most of them are distracted by reports from the other attacks. They do not expect anyone to be inside their base. Jake's team moved through the base like ghosts. When they encountered enemy soldiers, Ember would touch the soldiers' minds and make them look the other way, or remember urgent tasks in different parts of the base. It was exhausting for her, but it kept them from being discovered. They reached the 20th level just as alarms began sounding throughout the base. On the other side of the planet, Pete's biggest attack had succeeded in destroying a major hegemony supply depot. Enemy commanders were screaming orders and demanding reinforcements. Perfect timing, Jake said. Everyone will be focused on the attacks. Now we just need to reach the crystal chamber. The chamber was behind a massive steel door guarded by 2 soldiers in powered armor. These guards could not be confused or distracted like the others. They were too well trained and too alert. I will handle them, Carlos said, raising his modified weapon. Wait, Jake said. Let's try something else first. He opened Ember's pack and helped her climb out. The little dragon had grown even more during their journey. She was now the size of a wolf, her scales gleaming with health and power. Her golden eyes burned with determination. Can you make them sleep? Jake asked. I can try, Ember said, but it will reveal my presence to every sensor in the base. Do it. We're out of time anyway. Ember focused her telepathic abilities on the 2 guards. Instead of trying to confuse them, she reached deep into their minds and found the part that controlled sleep. Gently but firmly, she pushed them into unconsciousness. Both soldiers collapsed without making a sound, but alarms immediately began shrieking throughout the base. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Enemy voices shouted about detecting a telepathic presence. They know we're here, Jake said. Move fast. Carlos used his weapon to blast the door lock. The massive steel door swung open to reveal the crystal chamber beyond. Jake gasped at what he saw inside. The chamber was enormous, carved from the living rock of the mountain. Crystals of every size and color grew from the walls, floor, and ceiling. Some were as small as pebbles. Others were larger than trees. All of them pulsed with energy that made the air itself seem alive. In the center of the chamber stood the Master Crystal, a formation as tall as a building and as wide as a house. It glowed with power that hurt to look at directly. That one, Ember said, staring at the Master Crystal. That one can carry my voice to the stars. Jake helped Ember climb onto the Master Crystal. As soon as her claws touched its surface, the entire formation began to glow brighter. Power flowed through the crystal network like lightning through metal wires. Hurry, Carlos called from the doorway. Enemy soldiers are coming up the stairs. Ember closed her eyes and reached out with every bit of telepathic power she possessed. The crystals amplified her mental voice 1,000-fold, sending it racing through space toward the nearest coalition fleet. Jake felt the message as Ember sent it. He experienced her memories of the war, her determination to fight back, and her desperate hope that someone would hear and care enough to help. The message was not just words but pure emotion, impossible to ignore or misunderstand. In a star system 3 light-years away, Admiral Sarah Kim felt something touch her mind while she reviewed battle reports on her flagship. The mental voice was young but strong, carrying images of suffering and courage that brought tears to her eyes. We are still fighting, the voice said. We refuse to surrender. This world has crystals that could make the enemy's mind control technology unstoppable. Help us stop them. Help us prove that hope is stronger than fear. Admiral Kim had heard many distress calls during the war, but never one like this. She could feel the truth in every word, the genuine courage of people who would rather die than give up. More importantly, she understood the strategic threat the crystals represented. Communications, she called to her crew. Send a message to all ships in the fleet. We are changing course for the Valdris system. Maximum speed. Back in the crystal chamber, Ember collapsed from the effort of sending her message. Jake caught her as she fell and held her close. Did it work? He asked. Yes, Ember whispered. They heard me. They are coming. Explosions echoed through the chamber as hegemony soldiers tried to blast their way through the door Carlos was defending. The Valdorian fighter's weapon was powerful, but he was outnumbered 50-1. We need to hold this position until help arrives, Jake said. How long? Carlos asked between shots. Ember reached out with her weakened telepathic senses. The coalition fleet will be here in 4 hours, but the enemy is bringing everyone in the base to attack us. Jake looked around the crystal chamber and made a decision. Then we make our stand here. Among these crystals, Ember's telepathic abilities are stronger. She can coordinate resistance fighters across the planet while we hold this position. For the next 4 hours, Jake's small team fought the most important battle of their lives. Wave after wave of hegemony soldiers attacked the crystal chamber. Carlos and his Valdorian fighters held the doorway while Jake protected Ember as she used the crystals to coordinate resistance activities around the planet. Through her telepathic network, Ember told every fighter when enemy reinforcements were moving, where attacks would be most effective, and how to avoid traps. The resistance had never been so well coordinated. They began winning battles they should have lost. Then, just as Jake's team was running out of ammunition, the sky above Mount Taller exploded with light. Coalition warships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began attacking hegemony positions. Admiral Kim had brought her entire fleet, and they were angry about what they found on Valdris. The battle in space was short and brutal. Coalition ships were faster and better armed than the hegemony vessels that had been occupying the planet. Within an hour, every enemy ship had been destroyed or forced to retreat. On the ground, hegemony soldiers found themselves cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Many surrendered immediately. Others tried to fight but were overwhelmed by resistance. Fighters who suddenly had air support and fresh weapons. In the crystal chamber, Jake held Ember as they watched the last enemy soldiers retreat down the mountain. The little dragon who had called across the stars for help had saved her entire world. "You did it," Jake said. "You saved everyone." "We did it," Ember corrected him. "None of this would have been possible without you." Over the following weeks, coalition forces helped the people of Valdris rebuild their world. The underground cities became busy again. The crystal formations were protected as strategic resources. Most importantly, the planet became a symbol of hope for other worlds fighting the hegemony.